I'm here. I'm live. Upjab podcast. Thanks for everybody who's tuned into the first three episodes of the Upjab podcast. Man, the archives are doing real well. So I appreciate the support. Like I always say, man, I always appreciate and am humbled by the fact that people come to my channel and watch any of my videos. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the love I'm getting on Twitter. About 500 followers I've gained in about the past 5 weeks over on Twitter. So appreciate that. And the Upjab website will be coming soon as well because I like to write as well. So that should be coming soon and should streamline all my stuff over to there so everybody can just click on the website and get all my content over there. With all that being said, let's get to some boxing. And as I mentioned yesterday, beautiful weekend of boxing coming up. You got some really good events. You got Ryan Garcia coming back in a mismatch, but Ryan Garcia is back. And we talked about Ryan Garcia a little bit yesterday. Um, we also talked about Erickson Lubin versus Sebastian Fundora yesterday as well. And that's the matchup of the weekend. That's a true toss-up fight. As I mentioned yesterday, we rarely ever get true toss-up fights in boxing. We've got a lot of great matchups coming from April to June, early July, but not too many of them are true toss-up fights. And Lubin versus Fundora gives us that true toss-up fight, much like Charlo Castano too, much like Serrano versus Taylor. Those are true toss-ups. Lubin versus Fundora gives us that, and that'll be an interesting matchup. In my opinion, the matchup of the weekend as far as fun, competitive fight. Now, as far as Golovkin versus Murata, I wanted to feature that on this podcast and give a quick preview of that fight on this podcast. This fight isn't even odds. It's not a toss-up fight. Golovkin is minus, I'd say, about 400. So he's a healthy betting favorite. But Murata, they're still giving Murata a chance in this fight. He's not a heavy dog. He's a live dog. So they're giving Murata a chance in this fight. But Golovkin is the clear betting favorite. The reason Golovkin is the clear betting favorite is because Golovkin is Golovkin. Even at 40 years old, he's Golovkin. His experience, his power, his chin, that gives him the betting advantage even at 40 years old. The other reason is Murata, even though he's a legitimate, let me silence my phone real quick. Even though he's a legitimate, um, I would say he's a legitimate puncher. He's a legitimate champion. He's a legitimate belt holder in this fight. He hasn't been active. So you would say coming in, oh, Golovkin's 40 years old. He hasn't been all that active the past couple of years. So you give the younger, fresher, more active fighter a chance going in. But the problem with that is Murata hasn't been active either. Hasn't fought in 2.5 years. So you would hope that a guy, if you're giving him a chance against Golovkin, you would think that would be a guy who has to have a chance against Golovkin in order to give himself a chance, has to jump on Golovkin early. You got to jump on him early and see, okay, is this the night he's going to get old? Is this the night? Because if this is the night he's getting old, much like Pacquiao against Ugas, you jump on him and you jump on him and you jump on him every single round in Ugas versus Pacquiao. Ugas's output did not drop because Ugas understood my output drops. I give the older fighter a chance to crawl back into this fight. Ugas's output did not drop at all. He stayed on his front foot and he kept Pacquiao at bay. So if you're fighting an older fighter like Golovkin, you want to jump on him early and you want to keep your punch output up. The problem with Murata is we don't know if we're going to get that because Murata will likely show ring rust as well, being off 2.5 years. His timing will likely be off. He'll likely show ring rust. So I don't know if he's going to jump on Golovkin how a more active fighter would. Murata is capable of high output punching. He's shown that in his fights. He's shown that he can stop guys. He's shown he has decent power. The problem that Murata has is when he gets active, when he gets offensive minded, when he fights off his front foot, when he comes forward, squares up. He squares up. I talked about that last year, Ramirez versus Taylor. When Ramirez comes forward, when Ramirez fights on the inside, when he's pressure fighting, he'll square up, and that was going to lead to Taylor lighting him up with shots as Ramirez is coming in. You'll see the same thing here, Golovkin versus Murata. Why I love this fight is both guys are going to want to come forward. Murata's at his best when he's moving forward. Offensive minded. Golovkin, same thing. Golovkin has more layers to his game, obviously, but the wild card in this, once again, is how old is Golovkin going to look? Will his legs not be there? Will his reflexes not be there? Will his chin be softened up from fights with Canelo, etc.? All the years of wear and tear he's put on his body. Those are the wild cards. But if you're going to give a guy a chance against an older fighter, you want a guy who's been fresh, who's been active, and Murata just hasn't been that. So what I'm expecting from this fight is I'm expecting it to be fun. I'm expecting both guys to want to fight off their front foot, but I'm expecting both guys to come out a little slower than you'd expect, Murata in particular. And being that Murata's not going to be able to jump on Golovkin how he wants to, and he may win a round or two early, but he's not going to do enough damage, in my opinion, to Golovkin early in the fight to change the trajectory of the fight. And I think Golovkin's going to be comfortable, and Golovkin's going to have a lot to hit. Because what did I say? Murata will square up. Just go watch the film. Go watch film on Murata. After this podcast, go watch film on Murata. And what you'll see is a guy who will square up, who will be a little wide, and Golovkin's going to shoot those straighter shots in between. And those straighter shots are powerful shots. Even Golovkin's jab is a power shot straight up the middle. So when Murata's throwing looping shots and when Murata's right foot becomes parallel with his left foot because he squares up, Golovkin's going to be right in his zone. Shoom, shoom, shoom. He's going to be shooting those shots like lasers straight up the middle. And I expect Murata to wear down a little bit because Murata hasn't seen anything close to Golovkin. Even a 40-year-old Golovkin, he hasn't seen anything close to this power. He hasn't seen anything close to the footwork. He hasn't seen anything close to a guy who can cut off the ring like this. And Golovkin can do any of those things. The wild card in all of this is, will Golovkin get old overnight? I'm expecting to see Golovkin at least somewhere close enough to where he was 3-4 years ago. At least close enough. And even if we get a Golovkin who's 60%, 70% of what he was 4 years ago when he was fighting in the Canelo fights, he's still going to be good enough to beat Murata. Still going to be good enough. Shout out to Santeo Media. Go check out all his stuff. Great content over there. HCP in the building. But he's still going to be good enough to do what he has to do, even if he's 60, 70% of what Golovkin was. But it's still a trap fight, is the thing. This is still a trap fight. Shout out to D-Style Boxing and HCP. Go check them out on the roundtable tonight on with Beeb on the Ringside Reporter. It says Thursday, right? Yeah, Thursday night. So he's still going to be good enough. But what happens if Murata does touch him up a little bit early and Golovkin's chin has been softened up and Golovkin's legs aren't what they used to be and Golovkin's reflexes aren't what they used to be? Then we got ourselves a fight. And we got ourselves a dramatic fight. The drama show, right? Because Murata wants to come forward and punch. Murata's not a guy who's shy. So we got ourselves an action fight. I just can't envision a scenario, though. I can't imagine Golovkin being that far gone to where he would lose this fight, even being a trap fight, because he's got the Canelo fight lined up. So you would say maybe he's looking forward. But I still can't envision a scenario in which Golovkin loses this fight. Because if Murata's having success, Murata's going to have success landing punches. And if he's having success landing punches, Golovkin will also be landing punches. And we've seen in the past, Golovkin will allow you to land punches on him in order to get his off. Golovkin gets criticism for not being a great defensive fighter, and I just don't agree with that. I think Golovkin will let you hit him to lure you into a fight just so he can get his shots off. He knows himself, and he knows he's best when he's landing punches. He knows he's best when it's two-way action, and he's going to get the better of the action. A guy who is a terrible defensive fighter doesn't hang in there with Canelo for 24 rounds. He just doesn't. So that just doesn't, that narrative that Golovkin's a bad defensive fighter just doesn't fly with me. Never did. And I saw a lot of that criticism after the Kell Brook fight. But what happened in the Kell Brook fight is Golovkin didn't respect Kell Brook's power. So Kell Brook is having some success offensively early in that fight, and he gets lured into something that he shouldn't have been in. and Golovkin changes the trajectory of Kell Brook's career after that. Broken jaw, all that good stuff. So Golovkin will let you hit him. It's not like he's letting you. It's not like Golovkin's going in there and say, oh, hit me. Fine. He knows that if you get lured into being offensive minded, if you think that his chin is there to get hit, he's going to lure you in, and then he's got his shots. And his shots are going to be bigger than your shots. And they're going to be sharper too. That's definitely going to be the case with Murata. You're going to see that early. Because you're going to see Murata hitting Golovkin. But you're going to see Murata hitting Golovkin with wider shots and Murata getting a little more comfortable. And then when Murata gets comfortable coming in and squares up like Murata does, Golovkin's going to start shooting those shots straight up the middle and lighting Murata up. And I just see every time I envision this fight, and I've envisioned every scenario, whether it turns into a back and forth brawl, give and take action, or whether it turns into Murata being a little more shy and trying to outbox Golovkin. Either way, even with an older Golovkin, if he is 60, 70% of what he was 4 years ago, I still envision a scenario every time in which Golovkin wins this fight by middle round stoppage. I just do. I think he's going to wear Murata down. I think it's levels. Murata's a legit champion. Murata's a good fighter. This is a super fight, all that good stuff. It has to be a super fight if Golovkin's making $13 million over there and you're going to have ticket sales up. It's going to do well. But levels at the same time. Golovkin's a level ahead. Even if he's 3/4 of what he was 4 years ago, he's a couple levels ahead, at least one level ahead of where Murata should be going into this fight. Murata, the ring rust as well, you have to take that into account. This guy hasn't been active for 2.5 years, and that matters. It matters, especially if your best chance is to jump on a guy early. And if you're fighting an older fighter, you want to jump on him early. I discussed Ugas jumping on Pacquiao, and Pacquiao had some success early, but Ugas continued. The punch output either stayed even or went up round by round by round. He did not take his foot off the gas. He did not allow Pacquiao to get in a groove, get in his pattern, and get back in the fight. So if Murata is going to have a shot in this fight, he has to jump on Golovkin early. He has to test that age, and he has to keep the output up. The problem with Murata keeping up the output is if he's fighting at a high output against Golovkin, he's naturally leaving himself open for shots. And I just don't see him winning a war of attrition against a guy like Golovkin who can punch. The punching power is the last to leave. Always. George Foreman against Michael Moore. The punching power is the last to leave. The legs are the first to go. So it's harder to set up those power punches. True. But if you're able to set it up, the power punching is the last to leave. Golovkin's still going to have that power. And this is correct. Saturday is a good day for boxing. And if Golovkin wins this fight, and he wins it convincingly, then we set up the Canelo fight for September. And if Golovkin, I don't care what anybody's saying, I don't care what the narrative is out there that this trilogy is past and all this stuff. If Golovkin wins convincingly on Saturday, and then Canelo next month beats Bivol convincingly at 175, and these are both big asks because Murata's not a slouch, and Bivol is certainly not a slouch. And that's a tough fight for Canelo, tougher than people are thinking. But if they both win convincingly, that fight in September is going to be big. I don't care what anybody is telling you. So let's see what the Big Drama Show does on Saturday. And just to cap this thing off, I appreciate y'all always tuning in to the podcast. And I think Golovkin wins this fight by middle round stoppage or knockout. It's going to be too much for Murata, even at 40 years old. I am out.